Mouse in the Country. Albert was a mouse who lived in the city. He loved the business and the skyscrapers that were so tall he could hardly see the top. Going to bed was often a struggle for Albert. When his parents tried to tuck him in, he would want to stay awake to play. At night, the city could still be noisy sometimes. It wasn't always easy to fall asleep. Albert could hear the blaring of horns in the distance and the buzz of people on the move. "Go to bed, Albert," his parents said one day. "The city's still awake. I want to stay awake too." His parents sighed. It might be time to visit the country, they said. Albert's grandpa lived in the country. Albert had never been to the country before. So when his parents told him he was going for a visit with his grandpa, Albert wasn't sure how to feel. He loved his grandpa, but he had never had to go all the way to the country to see him. He imagined the country would be as dull as the skies during the rains, and as boring as watching paint dry. He imagined he would feel stuck and never get to play. He imagined it was all work. He imagined he would be sad every day. On the ride into the country, Albert was anxious. "Are we there yet?" he asked now and then. "Not yet," his mum and dad said whenever he asked. After a few hours, Albert noticed something. His environment was changing. The more they drove away from the city, the more trees he saw. He saw lots of colours. There was colour in the trees. There was colour in the shrubs. The sky seemed even bluer than he had ever seen. And the clouds looked whiter too. "We're here," his parents said at once. Albert's mouth was wide open. He had never seen anything as beautiful. It was different from the city, but he realized that he was wrong about some of it. When they arrived at his grandpa's house, Albert noticed that it was a cottage. His grandpa wobbled towards them. "Is that little Albert?" his grandpa asked as soon as he saw Albert. "Yes, Grandpa," Albert replied, "but I'm not so little anymore." His grandpa gave him a big hug and invited them in. The table was set for dinner, and Albert realized he was hungry. His stomach made a roaring sound, and Albert couldn't wait to eat. At dinner, Albert asked a lot of questions. "What's that painting behind you, Grandpa? How long have you lived here? Did you build this cottage yourself? How many kids like me live in the neighbourhood?" Albert's grandpa laughed heartily at Albert's questions, but he answered every one of them. "As for the little mice like you, I could introduce you to two tomorrow." Albert met Brit and George. Brit was a plump mouse just about his age. He seemed happy and had a big smile on his face. George was tall and skinny. He didn't smile like Brit, but seemed friendly. Albert's grandpa left them to play. They were not to stray too far from the house. "What's it like in the city?" George asked. "Yes, we've never met a mouse from the city before," Brit said. Albert's eyes lit up. He couldn't wait to tell them about the city and how much fun it was. "People are always walking fast in the city," Albert said. "The skyscrapers are so tall you can hardly see the top. There are ice cream trucks everywhere, and I have lots of friends." "It sounds like fun," Brit said. George shrugged. "The country is a lot of fun too." "Really?" Albert asked. "What do you do for fun?" "We go fishing. We have treasure hunts," George said. "Treasure hunts?" Albert said, with his eyes as wide as saucers. "Tell him about the note we found, George," Brit said. George seemed reluctant. "Please tell me," Albert begged. "Tell me everything." George looked around to make sure no one was listening in. He asked the others to come closer. "What I'm about to tell you is top secret. You can't tell anyone," George said to Albert. "I promise," Albert replied very quickly. "We were minding our own business in the old construction building back near Mimi's Brook, and we found a note hidden in a bottle which was partially buried in the ground. "We know it's about treasure, but we can't figure out what it means," Brit chimed in. "What if I could figure it out? Would you two let me in on the hunt?" George and Brit exchanged a look, and both nodded. "Great," Albert said. George brought out the note from his pocket. It read, "Follow the ancient path through the field of sunshine. Conquer these for a reward. A beautiful bed of thorns. A sweet little secret. A mighty adversary." "What could it mean?" Brit asked. "There's no golden field here." "It's a hidden message, so it doesn't have to be literal," Albert said. "But what could a field of sunshine mean?" George asked. "There are so many fields here. They're covered in flowers and weeds." "Flowers!" Albert exclaimed. "Is there a sunflower field around?" "Yes," George and Brit said at once. "And there's an old path there my dad told me about," George said. So the three mice set off to the sunflower field. They found the old path, which was covered with weeds. The young mice talked with each other. They told stories and jokes, and they laughed really hard. Finally, they came to a clearing in the forest at the end of the path. "I wonder what a beautiful bed of thorns is," Brit said. They all looked around, but could find no bed of thorns. "Are those roses?" Albert asked, pointing in the distance. "I think so," George replied. They all walked up to the roses. "I think this is it," Albert exclaimed. "Instead of a bed of roses, it said a bed of thorns, and roses have thorns." "What do we do now?" Brit asked. "Maybe we should pluck a rose," George suggested. The others agreed. "Don't touch my roses!" The mice looked around, but couldn't find who was speaking. "What was that?" Albert asked. "It is I," a butterfly said. "I am the owner of these roses. Don't touch them." "We're on a hunt," Albert said, "and we think we need your roses. May we have a rose, please?" The butterfly said. It flapped its small wings and thought for a moment. "Well, I'm a curious butterfly. What can you give me in exchange for a rose?" "Did you know mega-tall skyscrapers could reach 2,000 feet? The butterfly said. "I didn't know that, and now I do. You may have one rose." "Thank you," Albert said. He carefully cut a single rose. "Could you help us find our next clue? We're looking for a sweet little secret." The butterfly laughed. "I know where you need to go, but I doubt you'll get what you want." The butterfly directed them to a place in the forest with a tall tree. "I don't get it," Brit said when they arrived. "I can't see anything sweet." "I see a honeycomb up there," George said excitedly. "You can't touch my honey." The mice scampered away from the tree. "Who said that?" they asked. "It is I," a bee said, as he came buzzing around the mice. "What do you want?" "We're on a hunt, Mr. Bee. Could you give us a piece of your honeycomb?" "Ha! Go away, or I'll sting you," the bee said. "I have an idea," Albert said. "I hope it works. What if we gave you a beautiful rose in exchange for a honeycomb?" Albert said to the bee. "A rose?" the bee said excitedly. "I would love a rose." So the mice gave their rose in exchange for the honeycomb. "Would you please tell us where we can find a mighty adversary?" "Ha!" the bee replied. "I'll show you where, but I wouldn't go there if I were you." The mice walked away with the honeycomb. They didn't want to turn back, but they were afraid of what they would find. "Roar!" "What was that?" Brit asked. The three mice huddled together. Their hearts beat fast in their chests. Thump, thump, thump. "Who's in my territory?" a bear bellowed. The mice screamed. They tried to turn back, but could not. "Are you trying to steal my treasure?" the bear asked. The mice shook their heads. They were so scared it would be their end. "Well, Mr. Bear, "We're sorry for coming into your territory, but we have something we could give in exchange for your treasure." "And what would that be?" the bear asked. He sniffed them curiously. "A honeycomb," Albert replied. "Honey?" the bear said. "Give me, give me, give me." So the bear gave up his treasure, and the mice gave him a honeycomb. "We should get out of here," George said. The other two nodded. They ran as fast as their little feet could carry them, with the treasure they had got. When they arrived at Albert's grandpa's cottage, the mice spoke at the same time about the adventure they had just had. "The bear almost ate us," Brit exclaimed. "But we found treasure," Albert added. "Really?" his grandpa asked. "And what treasure did you three find?" The three exchanged looks with one another. They had no idea. Albert opened the latch that kept the box locked. They all huddled together to see what they would find. They found pretty feathers, colourful rocks, an old journal, a sling, an old locket, and other items. "Wow!" the mice exclaimed. "You found it," Albert's grandpa said. "My friends and I buried it a long time ago when we were about your age." Albert was elated. This was the best treasure hunt he had ever been on. His grandpa told them many stories of the joyful adventures he had with his friends. When Albert's parents tucked him into bed, it didn't take him more than a second to fall fast asleep.